Hey, Mind Over Matter listeners, welcome back. Today, we are going deep, but we are keeping it real. We are talking about what we actually need emotionally, not what looks good on a vision board, not what gets applause. The real stuff your nervous system has been begging you to notice. And I'm hyped because today's guest is Dr. J.D. Pincus. He's a social psychologist and the mind behind something called the periodic table of human motivations, plus the book, The Emotionally Agile Brain. Translation. He built a clean framework for the messy question we all live with. Why do I do what I do? And why do I feel like this? We are also zooming in on a part people love to avoid spiritual needs. Not religious debates, not performance spirituality. I mean the human need for meaning, connection, and inner alignment. Because if you ignore that layer, you can win externally and still feel empty inside. And honestly, this is the most expensive kind of success. So, alright, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, JD. It's such an honor to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Mhm. So, JD, in your framework, what's the most common reason people can't name their feelings? Is it the lack of vocabulary, or is it the fear of what the feeling will demand from them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the real reason ultimately is that our brains are not don't make that information accessible to us. There's a lot of things that happen in the way we're built that are subconscious. In fact, a recent I think it was Freud who said that the mind is like an iceberg. He said only 1/7 of it is visible above the water, and the rest of it is below the surface. And that's correct, but it wasn't nearly his proportions weren't correct. A recent study by Rakely showed that of the glucose metabolized in the brain, 95% is associated with subconscious processes. In other words, processes that we have no conscious access to. So only 5% is above the waterline, if you use Freud's metaphor. So a lot is happening in our brains that's completely outside of our awareness and control, the vast majority of stuff. And the reason that this matters in this context is that, essentially our emotional systems are a homeostatic device. They are telling us all the time how our bodies are functioning. This is something that I picked up from Antonio Damasio, a famous neuroscientist. Basically, it's telling us, are we sleepy? Are we hungry? Are we interested in something? Are we wanting to avoid something? And it's sort of a survival mechanism, but we only have conscious access to the very tail end of that. We don't consciously cause ourselves to be hungry or thirsty or tired. That's something that happens autonomically, and then we just get the output of it showing up in consciousness. It's the same thing with our emotional needs, our emotional need for belonging, our emotional need to be our best selves, to have autonomy, to kind of have control. Those are all things that we're not consciously in control of. They show up in our consciousness as a state, a sort of a vague feeling of good or bad. I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad, but we often can't accurately label what that is. So those are more complicated than things like hunger or thirst or feeling tired. So you're right in your question that part of it's not having the vocabulary, but I think more fundamentally, we just don't have enough information. We don't have access to that information in our brains to be able to describe it accurately.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And if someone's listening right now and they're totally emotionally numb or emotionally chaotic, what's one quick way to identify the underlying need in real time?
Yeah. So fortunately, we developed an app for this. It's based on some neuroscience, again, borrowing from Damasio's lab, which showed that people have an emotional response to images before they have a conscious ability to bias their responses. So what we did is we essentially came up with images that represent the emotional needs, and we serve them up to people one every second. So you have no time to think, literally no time to think at all. And we just simply ask you one question, thinking about whatever it is, thinking about the direction my life is going, let's say, I wish I could feel a little bit more. And then you'll see images show up one every second. And if you click them, it scores it. If you don't click it, it just goes on to the next image. And what people experience in this process is they end up feeling very sort of off balance. They don't know why they're picking images that they're picking. That's music to our ears. We want them to not think. And people will come out of it saying, well, that was sort of interesting. I wonder if it means anything. It probably doesn't mean anything. Well, it turns out it means a great deal. We can give you an instant readout of exactly what your unmet emotional needs are, which were sort of collected nearly subconsciously. And we find that these are incredibly predictive of actual behavior. For instance, we did this in the biotech industry, and we came up with a model just using this data that predicted 80% of the variance in whether or not people stayed in their job or quit, went to another company. So it's an incredibly powerful, predictive, explanatory framework. But the magic is to use this image-based technique that doesn't allow people to think and to simply access their sort of raw emotions at a gut level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wait. That's huge because you're basically saying the emotion isn't the problem, it's the signal. The problem is we keep hitting ignore like it's a term and conditions pop up.
That's right. Exactly. It's the emotions are there. No one has had the framework to describe them. And that's the other side of this. I mean, the technique is great, but the fact is there was never a vocabulary. There was never a periodic table, if you will, to describe in their totality every possible motivation that a human could experience. And that was the big contribution here. So essentially, came up with this model that said that motivation is really a question of change, right? And there are two questions when it comes to change. The first is, where do I want to make a change in my life, and what level of change do I seek? So the first question, where do I want to make a change? There are four dimensions of human life, and this is not something I invented. This is something I simply am restating from all five major world religions, philosophy of religion, psychology, etc., history. Um, these four dimensions are: you can be concerned with yourself, or you can be concerned with other people. That's the self versus the social. The other dimension is the material versus the spiritual. Material is money and objects and things and cars, jobs. And then the spiritual are things you can't see, right? The immaterial things that are principles, values, ethics, morals, right? Things like fairness, justice, equality, higher purpose, right? They're very motivating. They make people do all sorts of things, and yet they've been ignored systematically in the psychological literature. So when you take these four: self, material, social, spiritual, you cross them by three levels of development, and those three levels of development come from Aristotle. Aristotle had these three modes of existence. He used the example of a pile of lumber. The contractor comes and he drops off a pile of lumber in front of your house. At that point, it's in a state of pure potential. It can be turned into anything, right? So that's the sort of the foundational level. The next level is you've decided what you want to build. Let's say you want to build a shed, and you begin building it with your plans. It's now in a state of becoming, right? That's the next level. That's the experiential level. And then finally, you have a finished shed. You can put your machine, your tools in it and lock the door. That is now in a state of actualization. That is the aspirational level of striving. So these are the three levels. It's very philosophically appealing. There's just sort of a beginning, middle, and end. And there's the four domains. And when you cross these four domains by these three levels of striving, you end up with a home for every single one of the hundreds of motivational concepts that have been proposed in the psychological literature over the last 150 years. And that is a really big deal, because now we can describe the landscape. We can tell you exactly what is activated and what isn't activated. And it's not a sort of up to the particular language that's being used in this particular analysis. We're trying to describe all of it at once.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And a lot of us are high functioning. We are productive, responsible, impressive, yet we feel weirdly unsatisfied. In your model, What emotional needs get neglected when we are living in a grind mode?
Right. It's a good question. We live in a very sort of commercial, consumerist, materialistic kind of culture. And you think about it, companies, brands, products, their motive is to get you to buy their product by appealing to your needs and your emotional needs in particular, um, in order to get you to choose their product over somebody else's, or to get more of it than maybe you need. Uh, that is a sort of hyper focus on one of the four columns, which is the material domain. I think where people lose themselves and they find dissatisfaction is if they begin to believe that that is actually a goal they should pursue. If they actually should, get more stuff and get more expensive stuff, that somehow that will make them happy. That neglects the domain of the self, which is basically starting with the foundational need is need for psychological safety. I need to feel that I can be, safe. I can feel protected. If I feel protected, then I can begin to express who I am and speak in my own voice, be my authentic self, really be, explore my personality. And if I can do that, then I can grow to be my full, to my full potential, self-actualize, become the best version of myself I can be. Those are all needs that are not addressed by the material domain, right? Those are things that happen within the self. Within the social domain, there's certainly many products that market to the social domain needs. Snack foods, beverages, talk about sort of inclusion and belonging. People get together to enjoy these things, but you can certainly get together without those things, and you don't need those things to get together. So it starts with the sense of inclusion and belonging, right? Once you feel part of your group, your tribe, your family, that's when you can begin to develop those one-on-one deeper relationships that have to do with love and caring. Once those sort of mutual love, caring relationships are in place, over a lifetime of those good acts, you will then achieve respect and validation, affirmation, the highest level of the social domain. Again, things that are not available to you in a product or service. And then finally, there's the spiritual domain, which begins with the sense of justice, right? The idea that good is rewarded and bad is punished. Once that is in place, you can begin to think about applying those principles to gray areas of life. How much interest is too much self-interest? Are you being totally honest about what you're offering to people? Are you being transparent? If you are, that's really your first opportunity to begin to define a higher purpose for yourself that extends beyond the needs of the self or even the needs of the social. Beginning to abstract these kinds of principles of caring and love to, cosmic dimensions, to the universe, to all life, to all matter, for instance. That's not, again, something that is completely antithetical to material concerns. So to get all the way back to your question, I think the dissatisfaction comes largely from an overfocus on what you can see and what's tangible, which is defined by the material domain, and what you can't see. So they say that the best things in life aren't things. There's, self-development, social development, and spiritual development.
Yes, definitely. And what does it look like practically to meet those needs without blowing up your life? Like, no drama, eat, pray, quit your job, plot is required.
Yeah, and that is a struggle for people because they have been sort of conditioned to think that they need to sort of hyper focus on one area. Whether it's the material uh, needs that they feel that they have, and then the sort of work that's required to pay for those needs. It becomes a cycle where it's nothing but work and spend, which is all material domain, right? So there's no time left over to work on the self. There's no time to work on relationships with people. There's no time to work on the spiritual development. I think the key is balance. An argument I make throughout my book is that a lot of the problems that we have as a society come from over focus on one or two different domains or different cells in this matrix. So if I am totally committed, let's say, to my personal authenticity, and all I want to do is kind of dress outlandishly and cover myself in tattoos and piercings, because I want to express my authenticity and my individuality as an end in itself, you can end up sort of not having trouble fitting in. You have trouble with inclusion and caring. You can have trouble achieving respect and recognition. You can end up having trouble in terms of psychological safety. You can have trouble achieving your full potential. You can have trouble getting autonomy in order to make forward progress in the material domain. Uh, and it comes from an overfocus. And you can make that same argument for any cell in the matrix. If I'm completely consumed with the desire for spiritual transcendence, I can find myself neglecting, basic needs of my family, basic needs that I have, basic material needs. So again, I think the key, the way to practically do this is to make sure that you are carving out time for all 12 needs. And that seems like a lot. It really isn't, because the ultimate goal of this model, it's a pyramid model, and the foundational stuff's at the bottom, the widest part. The experiential needs are in the middle, and then the aspirational needs are on the top. When you get to the top and you've actually achieved, at least temporarily, some progress in all of your 12 needs, the apex of the pyramid is a place where there is a convergence. And what you do to satisfy one need actually satisfies other needs. So what I do for work actually is spiritually meaningful to me. Where I spend my time in trying to improve myself is actually a benefit to my relationships, and vice versa. So everything begins to collapse together, so that you aren't, separately focusing now on 12 different things. You're actually focusing on just a couple of principles, and those principles have benefits across the entire framework.
Yeah, I love that because it's giving sustainable systems, not spiritual theatrics. And we are optimizing inner life, not just building a prettier burnout.
That's right. Exactly. And I think that's that a lot of people talk about this sort of in partial terms. They'll talk about purpose, they'll talk about balance, they'll talk about, holism, they'll talk about inner peace or transcendence. But I haven't seen any model that really addresses all of it, that tells you what each one of those things means and how they function with regard to each other in a very practical way, so that you're not just getting a skewed sort of slice of the pie. There are books and programs dedicated to every one of the different 12 needs. Uh, Become your authentic self, servant leadership, achieve total focus and immersion. Uh, each one of those is just a little window into the whole, but I think there was a really important need for someone to describe the whole, and that's hopefully what I've done.
Mm-hmm, totally. And people hear spiritual and they either lean in hard or they roll their eyes. How do you define spiritual needs in a way that's universal and grounded?
Yeah. So that was actually a problem for me getting my work published initially, because the academic social sciences have sort of been biased against spirituality just right out of the gate. When you start talking about it, they begin to roll their eyes and think this is not scientific. Well, it was very important to me to start with science and start with a very well established body of psychological theory and research, empirical results that showed that this was a real thing. It had a real track record. It had, real scholarship associated with it. And I was very careful to define my levels of spirituality in accordance with existing accepted theory. So it begins with the need for justice, right? And the need for justice is something that shows up in all sorts of places. It shows up in theories of altruism. Why does somebody help somebody else? And there's all these, theories that say basically, a bystander will get involved because they're seeking some sort of social rewards for appearing to be a good person. Well, that may be the case, and that probably explains a little bit of it. But there are certainly cases which are not that, when no one is ever going to know about it. And that happens all the time. And that is, not a selfish interest. That is an actual need for justice, an actual need for ethics or doing the right thing, where incredible self-sacrifice can go on. And it's a real thing. And you see this in the research of Paul Bloom, who took babies, 4-month-old babies, 6-month-old babies, and had them watch little puppet shows where there's a good character who helps another character move a big boulder up a hill. And then there's a bad character who tries to push the rock down the other way and interfere with their progress. What he finds is that these babies who have no language, uh, differentially look at the good character and look away from the bad character. And again, this is something that is not taught. It's something that they are born with, and it's something that's just an innate preference for good over bad, for good over evil. And that, to me, is some of the most compelling evidence of all that there's a foundational need for justice. Then you have the sort of ethics, comes in, and the sort of moral motivation, the concept that, we are drawn toward wanting to make choices that are good in the broadest possible sense. Kant's categorical imperative falls here. The concept that, how can we judge that something is good? We can judge it that way because if everybody did it, would it be good, for everyone? If I do it and other people do it, am I just getting away with something? So the categorical imperative works there. So again, it's got a long, history and lineage. You had Piaget's levels of moral development. You had Kohlberg also. And interestingly, Kohlberg ends his stages of moral development with this idea of transcendence. And that's the top of my spiritual domain, is transcendence, sort of finding this higher purpose that transcends ordinary human concerns of the self and the material and the social. And now applying principles of justice and ethics to, things you can't see, to concepts that go beyond ordinary human life in 3 dimensions. And that, to me, it's a very scientifically grounded way of talking about spirituality. And it's not just me who says this. Basically, every theologian who's ever lived, if you look into their writings, they always say that spirituality and spiritual awakenings always begin with justice and ethics. And in fact, Jonathan Edwards, in the United States in the First Great Awakening, I think 1740 or so, said, how can you tell if a spiritual awakening is real, if it's a true, if the spirit is actually flowing, is to look for changes in justice and ethics. He said, if there's a positive change in justice, fairness, equality, ethics, then you can say that this is a real, spiritual awakening. And if it's not, it's really just, somebody just sort of having a hallucination, and if there's no positive effects in those areas. So again, I think it's a very deeply, solidly grounded argument.
Yes, because when meaning is missing, everything starts to feel like a chore, even the good stuff. And that's not just laziness, that's misalignment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, and I think exactly. I think part of the model that's important to recognize is the fact that we have positive needs and negative needs. We have needs for more of the good and for less of the bad. And that meaning is a big part of both of those. If you're feeling insecure, if you're feeling disempowered, if you're feeling bored or held back, unloved, disrespected, there's a meaning to all of those things in terms of what that feeling is, why you need to get rid of that feeling. And the presence of those negative needs is actually very, very correlated with a whole host of negative states in terms of mental health. So if you're feeling like you have a lot of negatives to get rid of, those meanings are powerful, and those meanings can be very damaging to you. So it's part of the reason it's very important to do this work and to get to do these assessments and find out what it is specifically that are holding people back, because those become the priority items for managing. Once you've removed a lot of those negatives and you're feeling pretty good, you have a normal sort of baseline, then you begin thinking about, how do I achieve more? How do I aspire to more of the good in each of these areas? How can I get deeper immersion? How can I have deeper success, deeper, personal growth, achieve, greater state of justice and ethics? And that's associated with psychological health. There's, of course, the book on Amazon. And there is also, people can take this assessment for free at agilebrain.com. So it'll give them an instant result.
Yes,
And it only takes
perfect.
3 minutes.
Mhm. Yes, 100%. So, alright, y'all, here's the takeaway. Your emotions aren't random, they are not too much, they're data, they're direction. And your spiritual needs are not extra credit, they are core infrastructure. And at the end of it, so here's a mini challenge for the next 24 hours. At the end of today, ask yourself this one question and actually answer it honestly. What emotions showed up the loudest today? And what need was it trying to protect or request? Then do one tiny action that meets that need. One text, one boundary, one breath, one moment of meaning. Keep it small, keep it real. And if this conversation hit, share this episode with one person who has been acting fine, but you can tell they are running on fumes. And if you want more tools like this, follow the show and drop a review. It helps the right people find us. This is Mind Over Matter. I'm Anya. Huge thanks to Dr. J.D. Pincus for bringing the science and the soul. Alright, go take care of your needs like a business priority. Because it is. See you in the next episode.